This video is part of a series of video instructions on the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tool. This is instruction 2.3 on standard values and the list of additional standard values. Actually, there are two BioGrace tools. There's BioGrace 1 for biofuels and BioGrace 2 for electricity, heat and cooling from biomass. All information is accessible through www.biograce.net. The instruction will demonstrate the BioGrace 1 Excel tool, but can also be used for BioGrace 2, as in both Excel tools, one common list of standard values is used and the calculations are made in exactly the same way. For making greenhouse gas calculations, you need a methodology, data from the process, numbers or coefficients to convert these data into greenhouse gas emissions, and data or numbers for the reference process. This video instruction 2.3 is on numbers and coefficients to convert data into greenhouse gas emissions. First, I will explain the difference between input data and standard values. This is a screenshot of part of the BioGrace Excel tool. Input data are the data that a user will replace in the tool and that in most cases have a direct relation with numbers that the user will know, like the yield of rapeseed or the amount of fertilizer used to produce the rapeseed, or numbers that can be determined from input numbers, such as the N2O emissions from the field. Standard values are the values needed to convert input data into greenhouse gas emissions, like in the example shown here, the greenhouse gas emission coefficients for the use of 1 kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer, expressed as grams CO2 per kilogram fertilizer, grams CH4 per kilogram, and grams N2O per kilogram. The values that we consider to be standard values are emission coefficients such as the grams CO2, CH4 and N2O per kilogram nitrogen fertilizer as we have just seen, lower heating values in megajoule per kilogram, for instance for a kilogram of rapeseed or a kilogram of wheat, densities in kilogram per liter, transport efficiencies in megajoule of fuel used per ton and per kilogram of goods transported, emissions of CH4 and N2O for boilers, CHPs, trucks and ships. In the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculations, these numbers and coefficients are assumed to be fixed or standard, as it will not be feasible to ask every user of the BioGrace Excel tool to calculate the actual emission coefficients for natural gas delivered to the European market or the emissions from transport by ship. Within BioGrace, these numbers are therefore called standard values. The standard values are included in the BioGrace Excel tool as a separate sheet called List of Standard Values. These values are used making the calculations in the Excel tool. You can find the list of standard values here. You can see that the list contains a large number of columns with all types of numbers as shown on the previous slide, and also a large number of rows with all the materials and transport modes needed to make greenhouse gas calculations. The list contains all standard values needed to make calculations for biofuels and also for electricity, heat and cooling from solid biomass, as the list is the same for the BioGrace 1 tool for biofuels, the BioGrace 2 tool for electricity, heat and cooling from biomass. Of course, such numbers are the result of small LCA analysis, and they will change over time. For instance, the average emission from synthetic nitrogen fertilizer in Europe will change over the years, depending on the share of the different components that are used as a nitrogen fertilizer, such as ammonium nitrate and urea. and depending on the source of the feedstock, like natural gas, and the location where the fertilizer is produced. The Joint Research Centre, GRC, of the European Commission will update these values from time to time. And when data are updated, then BioGrace will update the list of standard values as well. So the current standard values will be valid for a number of years. Then, after an update, the new set of standard values will apply for another few years, etc. Is the use of the BioGrace standard values binding? No, it is not. Under some conditions, other values may be taken. This is covered by BioGrace calculation rule number 2.2.1. How this has to be dealt with depends on whether the input material is included in the list of standard values. If it is not, then the rule for using another value is relatively simple, and a number from the list of additional standard values can be taken, to which I will come back in a moment. If the material is included in the list of standard values, then the requirements are more strict. It has to be documented that the material in question was used, and it has to be documented how the emission from the production and use of this material was calculated. In this case, you should read and apply the second point of BioGrace calculation rule number 2.2.1. BioGrace has also developed a list of additional standard values. These are values that do not come from GRC like the other standard values, but were found from other sources. The list contains emission coefficients for mineral fertilizers and other agro inputs, for other inputs into biofuel conversion like process chemicals, for the average emission from grid electricity from individual countries in Europe and on other continents, for solid and gaseous biomass sources for energy, and transport efficiencies for pipeline transport. As mentioned before, these values can be used when the material in question is not included in the list of standard values. If taking a number from the list of additional standard values, you should also take over the reference given in the list. In a separate video instruction, it will be shown how the values from the list of additional standard values and standard values from other sources can be applied in the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tool.